incredible introduction I've ever had.
Get up, stand up.
Wow. I've listened to introductions and sort of thought, wow, that's not me. And I've actually never been choked up before, but fasten your seatbelt. I've been told I have 30 minutes or less to tell you a story, and I'm going to tell you the punchline in the beginning, and then I'm going to go through lots of images, examples, and I will talk slowly and fast at the same time. The punchline is that out of the 1.2 billion children in the world, there are 100 million who just don't go to school. I don't mean drop out, they just don't go to first grade. And there are about another 400 million who, maybe I shouldn't say this, but almost, ought not to, because it really isn't very good. It's pretty crummy. So the question is, how do you change that? Because everybody in this room, you wouldn't be here otherwise, believes that a nation's most precious natural resource is children. And if you want to change that, most people say build schools, train teachers, and yes, that's something to do, but it's going to take a very long time. So in between, can we actually leverage the children themselves? That's the question. And sorry, I'm going to go back to the, first slide. And the first time I tried this was in Senegal in 1982, where we brought, in this case, an Apple, IBM PC wasn't even on the market, to a village that didn't speak French, didn't speak English. The kids had seen electricity, or at least light bulbs and a few things and some cars, but these kids played those keyboards like pianos. This is a long time ago. This is 30 years ago. And what we learned at the time was that those kids were no different than the ones in the suburbs of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And flash forward almost 20 years in Cambodia, in a village where the average income was $40 per year, not per month. No electricity, no telephone, no nothing. And these kids, when they got there, connected in this case, because there's a satellite dish in the background, laptops and took them home at night. It was the brightest light source in the house because there was no electricity, but there was the power of the laptops. There was a generator for the school. And I looked at this and I said, this particular village had a tooth fairy, but could you scale it up? And so I started down a path in 2005 to scale it up with the intention of doing something that normal market forces would not do. And as I was saying to somebody at the cocktail party, when I wake up in the morning, I say to myself, or ask myself one question: will normal market forces do what I'm doing? And if the answer is yes, then stop. If the answer is no, keep going. And so in this particular case, what normal market forces weren't going to do in 2005 is make a $100 laptop that presumably many, many children could get. The economics of it works out to be 50 cents per week per child total cost of ownership. Now, 50 cents per week is a lot of money for the people that I'm talking about, but it's still manageable. It's a manageable number. And if you could do it for this cost, it made sense. And so this is the machine we showed. Our partner was the United Nations at the time. It converted into an electronic book, and since we were a nonprofit, we could have partners like the United Nations. And when we announced this, everybody was interested, but it took, to be honest with you, a little bit longer to get it, to realize it. And finally, when we made it and got it out there today, and I'll tell you the end game, today we have about 3 million of them around the world. Now, where are they? They're in the hands of kids who own them. It's not the schools, it's not the governments. The kids own them. About 100,000 kids in Peru today are teaching their parents how to read and write. I don't have a better story. And we tend to think of education as what we are going to transmit to the children, and they are going to absorb it and grow up, so to speak, with this increasing body of knowledge. Well, the kids actually, in many of the places we are the agents of change. And the part that I hope will astonish you at the end of this story is that the kids can do a lot more than even I thought. So when we did this, and as you will see, it just all over, actually, perhaps that's one of the, sorry, well, it doesn't go back, there we go. That's in Nepal. I can just, again, tell you anecdote after anecdote. Peru, Uruguay, Colombia, Nigeria, also Nigeria, Mongolia, Cambodia, Ethiopia, India. Actually, this picture really interested me because this teacher had the kids lined up in perfect lines in the class, and corporal punishment, which is part of the curriculum in some of these countries, the kids were sitting there, they just didn't want to ask a question, because if you got the question wrong, there was this little whip, and it was like fly swatting. And this is the way he teaches today. And that, to me, in the one laptop per child example, is such a perfect example of where the kids run to school, the parents hang in the window, and this teacher who had never touched a computer in his life said to me, "I've never loved teaching so much." So this is sort of a very good story. The poster child and Uruguay, which was the last image, is really a poster child for us because they did every single child in the country. If you go to Peru, and you will see any child between the age of 5 and 15, it's about 500,000 of them, have these little green and white laptops. Now, what that'll mean 10 years from now, I think we'll figure that out 10 years from now, but I think you're going to see a much more creative society, a much different society than what it is today. So in 2009, we're technologists. I'm at MIT, the nonprofit at this point had grown so big, it was almost $1 billion was spent in the laptop program over its 6 years of life. We decided to look at what would the next generation. This was before the iPad came out, and we were looking at the way children would interact with things that were books, surrogate books. Now, when we ship a laptop into a village, it has 100 books on it. Now, that is not going to impress anybody in this room. When we ship 100 laptops into a village with 100 kids, the part you may not think of immediately is that each one of them has 100 different books. So that is 10,000 books have suddenly arrived in this village. And so I looked at it and I said, wow, let's scale that up too. And that is why it became very tablet-oriented. And you will see in a moment that sort of one laptop per child became one tablet per child. Now here's the question, and this is what I think is perhaps the most important part of what I have to say. When we did the laptop project, and it's still going on, there's a group, and we've spun out, it's an NGO, it has its executives, I'm not even on its board. That's how independent it is. And we asked ourselves, again, the same question, what will market forces not do? And we decided to really focus on the 100 million kids who don't go to school. Now, those 100 million kids who could get something like this are in places like that. We've done now an experiment, and I want to distinguish very clearly between a project like one laptop per child, which is lots of logistics and manufacturing and design and all the rest, to an experiment. And this experiment has been conducted in Ethiopia in 2 villages that are like quite a few villages, but these 2 have the property that nobody in the village has ever seen a written word. They had never seen a label on a bottle. They had never seen a street sign. They had never seen a printed piece of paper. Adults were illiterate, children illiterate, and again, no sense of literacy as to even what it would mean. And we went into those villages, not me, the Ethiopian team, and dropped off in closed boxes tablets. No instruction, no human being left behind. The boxes were just piled up in the village, and the people left. Now, I thought what could happen, since there were as many tablets as there were kids in both of these villages, that the kids would play with the boxes. Now, there's one piece I haven't told you, and that is that somebody went into the village a few days earlier with a solar panel and showed an adult, at least put it outdoors. I mean, sort of get the solar panel in the sun, and that there was a plug, but that was about it. Kids hadn't seen a cell phone, hadn't seen an on-off switch. Now, the tablets in the boxes are hot, so to speak. And by that, I simply mean that when you turn on the tablet, it records every touch you make, every program you fire up, takes pictures. It does, it's, if you will, snooping on you, and has all the IRB stuff done beforehand. And what happened? What happened is that after 2.5 minutes, a kid not only found that there was a tablet in the box, but figured out how to turn it on. Within 4 days, they were using 47 apps per child per day. Within 2 weeks, they were singing ABC songs, okay? Where they were just, see who could say A, B, C, D, E, F, G faster than the other. And I actually finally said, I've got to go see this. And I went to this particular village. And within 6 months, and this part even I don't believe, they hacked the system, okay? Now, some fool at MIT or at one laptop per child had disabled the cameras. And these kids figured out there was a camera there and that they could enable it. And we really, as best we can, have checked out that somebody didn't sneak into the village and show them. So that was pretty extraordinary. So here's the question for the experiment. Can these kids learn to read on their own? Because if you can learn to read, you can read to learn. And again, remember the 50 cents per week per child. It's not an outrageous, this isn't quite as outrageous as it sounds, to actually give every single child a connected laptop. The 50 cents actually includes the connectivity, includes theft, includes purchase, includes maintenance, includes everything. So it really is economically sustainable. It's manageable. So this is what I sort of, this could be the cover of National Geographic. Parents in this village, somewhat distant, they didn't get that involved. In another village, they did. But the picture I want you to remember is the last one here, is this picture. And what's extraordinarily fascinating to me in this picture, and I've seen a lot of villages with a lot of laptops and all these sort of situations for years and years. Some pictures I showed you that went back to 1982. What's extraordinary about this picture is that, just parenthetically, I don't know what the kid's doing on the right-hand side. I don't know if he's telling them what to do, or if, I just, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. But look at the other 5. Each one has a tablet, but the one on the end, on the right, is leaning over and using the tablet of the kid to his left, And likewise, the next one in is using the other kids and so on. Talk about collaboration. I mean, talk about sort of doing things together. When I went, which is now 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, to the village, what astonished me wasn't just this kind of picture, but was when there were 20, there were never more than 20 kids that I saw, but when there were 20 kids with 20 tablets, they all were doing something different. And everything I remember from one laptop per child, which was much more school-centric, the teacher would say, well, now we're doing this, and everybody does it. And even in the most enlightened classroom, there was a synchrony, and then it went, you know, it sort of happened in a very different fashion than it does here. So now, and the votes are still out, if these kids can learn to read on their own, and remember, there's no adult, there's no teacher, does that help us not just understand the 100 million who don't go to school, but does it help us understand our own kids, our own schools? We have in New York City, Los Angeles, and other places, perhaps not Houston, but we have kids who go through 6, 8 years of school and come out the other end and can't read. And if these kids with no school and no teachers learn how to read, that would be very significant. And I want to leave you with one last thought, which to me is very important because most people confuse education with learning. Learning is to education what finance is to banking. And banks are to banking what schools are to education. Now, if you want to change the economics and finance and the structure of a nation or the world, yeah, you want to have some better banks and you don't want a totally dilapidated banking system. But there is a more fundamental element than just the institutional means that a lot of, in this case, learning happens. And in fact, sometimes arguably not that much. A lot more learning happens on your own. And in all of our lives, the first roughly 5, 6 years happened by interacting with the world. So when you tease apart learning from education and you focus on learning, then there's another thing in that to tease apart. And that is the difference between knowing and understanding. Now, it's not just a play on words. What our entire education system worldwide, this isn't unique to the United States, is based on is knowing. How do you know? You memorize stuff. And then I say, do you know this? Or I ask you questions and you spit it back. You may not understand a thing. And all we do with tests is we really test if kids have learned, but it's not learning really, it's knowing. And that's a very, very fundamental difference. Now there's one exception, and I'd like to encourage anybody who's in a position to do this with your own kids, with grandkids, nieces, nephews, school systems, whatever. There's one thing in at least my life, it kind of fell off the table in the past 20, 30 years, that was different. And that was, believe it or not, computer programming. Because when kids, the age of these kids, and they are starting to do it, write computer programs, it is the closest approximation to thinking about thinking. It sounds very abstract, but you take a problem, you reduce it into instructions, it's an algorithm, it executes, and guess what? It never works the first time. And what happens when it doesn't work? You look at what it did, which you wanted to draw a circle and it does something else. And then you go back and you debug. You figure out, and then you execute it again, and eventually it does what you want to do. And when we were first doing this in the 70s with kids, in this country, and then later with kids, including Pakistan and Afghanistan, actually, what we discovered is that the kids became much better at certain things, like, believe it or not, spelling. Why would a kid who writes a computer program be a better speller? And the answer is, when you debug a program, what's the most fun? Getting rid of the errors, looking at what the thing did wrong. When I went to school, and I was a bad speller, if I got 8 out of 10 words correct in a spelling project, that was a B. And for me to get a B was fantastic. And so believe me, the 2 words I didn't get right, under the carpet. Programmers, what did they do? They said, which ones did you get wrong? Oh, come on, it's I before E except after C. And they played around with it, and they all became better spellers. So one of the things we hope to leave in these villages, and I'll end here, is the idea of not just learning by yourself, but understanding and playing with these things. And this is why I get goosebumps on my goosebumps when I see these kids in an illiterate village hacking the system after 6 months. Thank you very much.